Okay, let's get started. Hi, everyone. This is Scott King over at Zimperium. Thanks a lot for joining us on this Thursday morning or afternoon, depending on the region that you are viewing this webinar from. I am joined with my colleague, JT Keating. JT is in San Francisco today, and I am in Dallas presenting The Threat is Real. And we're going to talk with you a little bit about the Global Threat Intelligence Report that we have recently posted on the blog. Everyone will receive the paper and the link to the paper after the presentation. We'll post the slides on SlideShare. So if you'd like to share these with your colleagues and really explain about mobile threats inside of your company, then you're more than welcome to use all of our material, and we encourage you to do so, obviously. So let's get started. So JT, are you there?
Yes, sir.
All right, just making sure. So we got all that covered. Let's talk a little bit about the mobile threat. So we get a lot of questions on, where the mobile threats come from, how they attack our devices. What this data right here is from the 2017 Mobile Security Spotlight. This is user survey data that we use to explain that organizations are getting breached, they are finding malware, and they are detecting malicious Wi-Fi. Talk to us a little bit about the mobile threats.
Yeah, so there's what we talk about a lot of times at Zimperium is the DNA of mobile threats. There's device attacks, network attacks, and malicious apps. And mobile platforms are very different than traditional endpoints in that there's different things involved. One is the user is the admin, which terrifies security people around the country or around the world. Second is you can't really play around in the kernel of the operating system. And the third is all the apps are containerized. So that, it's a general rule, particularly in iOS, for instance, apps can't talk with other apps. So what it does, though, is it does set up these three different attacks, and they're not really equal, as we're going to be talking about. The primary focus of any hacker, any bad guy, is going to be to compromise the device, because the rules of security still apply in mobile, just like they do every place else. One of which is I want to maintain a persistent foothold. If I'm going to take the time to compromise a device, I'm going to make sure that I own that device going forward. So there's D, N, and A, and for us, D is the primary thing because we're very enterprise focused. So that is focus, although we will be talking about malicious apps as we go forward.
And then like you said, we're focused on the D. A compromised device is really dangerous because essentially it could be used as a surveillance device against you, and you may never know.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And that's obviously, matter of fact, when we do a lot of our tutorials and the like, we show people how easy it is, very easy it is for a hacker to quickly have root access and almost like command line access, which we as individuals on our mobile devices don't even have. So yeah, that's very much the case. And I think, Scott, we're going to be talking about this data. If we could just go back to that one slide real quick. Just a quick point on the percentages over here. You see that 24%, this again is from the information security group at LinkedIn, 300,000 security professionals. Almost a quarter of the organization said, yeah, we recognize the fact we've had a mobile breach in the last year or so. And 43% of the folks say, I have no idea. One of the first things that customers that come to us do is turn the lights on. They actually have no visibility into their mobile devices today. What's interesting for me about this stat is there's a couple things that are interesting. One is when we did this last year, Scott, you recall, it was 20% of the organization said they had experienced a breach. So we have about a 20% bump right there. And almost 50% had said they were unsure. So as more and more companies are rolling out mobile threat solutions that can turn the lights on, the I don't know number is starting to drop because the lights have been turned on, and well, unfortunately I do know because I notice I've been breached has gone up pretty significantly.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. You're right. In 2016, the unsure of a mobile security breach was near 50%. So that is, that's interesting because now you're getting the data and you can run your business and make better decisions if you do have that threat data on your mobile devices.
Exactly.
And then, speaking of, you were talking about the device compromise and how hackers or cyber criminals are actually getting into these devices. So the vulnerabilities for both Android and iOS continue to increase, and we've charted this over the past 10 years, and it's increased significantly. Talk to us about the different ways that the vulnerability scores are. I see here on the top portion where you're getting scores of 7 and above. Those are severe bugs that are in our devices.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, when I look at this chart, here are the various different things that come to mind. And we talk again about this in the threat report, which you're going to be telling everybody about receiving at the end of all this. But a couple things pop out at me with this. I mean, obviously the jump in 2015 and then all of a sudden 16, 17, as you can see that through September of 2017 we dwarfed what was dwarfing everything before that. So you can look at the aggregate numbers and go, wow, this is kind of crazy. Some people, ask the question, well, what happened in 2015? Well, what happened in 2015 was stage fright, which Joshua Drake of our team and some other exploits came out, and all of a sudden it started hitting the radar, right? So the aggregate number is skyrocketing. But to your point, Scott, which is a great one, if y'all can see the kind of reddish color behind all of this, those are CVE score 7+, and the CVE score 7+ is considered a severe vulnerability that needs to be patched immediately. And as we talk about in the threat report, both Android and iOS in the third quarter, the number of CVEs were staggering. I mean, for instance, if you think about the Apple side of the world, I want to say, Scott, there was like 100 and something CVEs that were patched in the third quarter alone. Something along those lines, and 200 and something. Here, I'll give you the exact data. It's right here in front of me.
So in the third quarter, Apple did, I believe, 3 updates, and they fixed 139 different CVEs in those updates.
Right, and then 281 for Android were fixed. So obviously they're not only the CVEs very severe, they're patching much more rapidly than ever before. And then I think something that's really interesting is that the little green line. The little green line down there were the number of CVEs reported in Windows. And I actually saw an article yesterday where they were talking about the Patch Tuesday that came out, this week for Windows, and they basically said, look, it was a yawner. Everyone can go back and drink their eggnog and not pay attention. There were some critical things in Explorer, but as far as Windows as an OS, there wasn't a single severe bug.
Yeah, I mean, that's a much more mature operating system, and primarily we use the mobile devices anyway. So, I think the increase is, people are using the devices more. There's more demand for specialized apps, and there's just research has increased on both sides, right? So both white hat and black hat research has increased significantly since the mobile devices are our primary, work device.
Exactly.
So JT talked a little bit about how we're going to classify these threats, and we do these in the device, network, and application categories. And right here, what we're going to talk about is just an iOS profile. So this is just a simple method of how a hacker or a cyber criminal will compromise your device. Here, it's talking about putting an iOS profile. So JT, you talked earlier about the user is the admin for a mobile device, and that's kind of a difficult task for security professionals. That's why we have MDM and EMM packages to help manage these devices in and out of our networks. Talk to us about iOS profiles and how dangerous those are.
Yeah, it's funny because I've been in security business for a billion years or something, along with everybody else, and it's funny because I heard at one time a security professional said that the single greatest threat to enterprise security is a carbon-based life form, and he was specifically talking about his users, and that was in a scenario where the users were on traditional endpoints with patch management systems that could push patches out, antivirus that was centrally run and organized by IT and security teams, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now all of a sudden you've got this user that's out there. There is no patch management system to push stuff out. The user is the one who gets to decide what networks they're going to roll in and out of, and what apps they're going to install. And in this case, profiles. This happens to be all the different kill chains we've got here, and this is one of the primary things you definitely see in mobile security is, a man-in-the-middle attack will be used to deliver an exploit, or a malicious app will be delivered to, get an elevation of privilege, that sort of stuff. In this particular case, so all of these little kill chain examples we've got going across are actual customers of ours. These are actual things that we've seen with customers. In this particular case, it was a consulting firm, and a lot of their consultants would go into to customer networks and the like, and they were hamstrung by the networks that they were on, the corporate networks they were on. So they started installing a free VPN to actually be able to get out to do the stuff they wanted to do on their phone. Well, and of course, consultants talk to consultants, and so everybody started having this. Well, these free VPN profiles actually included the ability for a hacker to decrypt all of their traffic and see everything in plain text. So one of the things that we did, and this presentation is not a pitch for Zimperium product directly, but this was the sort of thing that we were able to detect these malicious profiles and then make sure that they were no longer able to function.
Yeah, very dangerous. And I believe that customer already was managing devices, right, with an MDM package, but they didn't have visibility into those free VPN apps, basically circumventing all the security policies that they were trying to manage.
Exactly. That's exactly correct.
So, here what we did is we've taken a snapshot of our devices back in September 30, and we looked at all of the different configurations of the devices. So, JT was explaining to us about malicious profiles, and the malicious profiles from an overall perspective are a small percentage of risk. But what is more concerning is the vulnerable devices that still are out there when these patches from Google and Apple come out. People still aren't updating their devices. So we saw about 60% of devices were still vulnerable and not have installed the patches that were available. So in the report, we talk about even when iOS 11 came out, which was September 19, 39% of the devices still hadn't updated. Yes, it's a short time frame, but I think from our view, we update our devices as soon as the patches come out, and I just our data shows that our corporate customers kind of lag in that area. The high risk configurations that we found are alerting and alarming as well. So 11% of the devices in our environment have what we consider a high risk configuration. So these are devices that are allowing apps from third-party app stores, so outside of Play or iOS. They have developer options enabled, or USB debugging for Android. So these are extremely risky. We don't know exactly who the users are that have these devices because we're not actually reading and looking at that data. But just from an overall perspective, it does open the door to different attacks and different methods to get into the device to compromise it. So JT, any comments on the device risks that we see out there that are just stagnant risks? They're just out there and then just open doors.
Yeah, absolutely. As we mentioned, Zimperium's strength from the very beginning has been the enterprise market. And so everything we've done has been based around the thought of how do you protect an enterprise, which is different than how do you protect a consumer. Now, ultimately, we want to have protection for all businesses and consumers on the mobile world, but our strength has been how do we protect an enterprise. So basically what we're doing is how do you protect against a targeted attack against an enterprise. I mentioned the kill chain earlier, and Scott and I have been talking about this. The number one way that we see targeted attacks occur, if I'm targeting XYZ Corporation, I'm not going to drop an app in the App Store and pray that somebody from XYZ Corporation downloads that app. What I'm going to do is a targeted attack, and it usually starts with one of two things, but the two things are a man-in-the-middle attack of some sort where it compromises your network, and we're going to talk about that in a second, or potentially a phishing attack. But man-in-the-middle attacks are a primary thing, and what they do is they will literally sit in a coffee shop or whatever the case may be, and they wait for traffic from XYZ Corporation to be able to sorry, I was distracted by that, but they look for XYZ Corporation to say, okay, now I know this person works for XYZ Corporation. The very next part of that scan is what platform are they on and what OS are they on? And what they do is they then say, based on that, I know what exploit's going to work. So this vulnerable device line item is extremely important because as a targeted attack, you're basically showing them. It's like, from football, terminology, it's like, showing your defensive playbook to the other team. They know exactly where to come in and where to go. So the vulnerable thing is very, very important and leads to the other three that are on here.
And then, sorry for distracting you, JT, but we're going to talk about some of the research that the guys over at Z Labs, the Zimperium Z Labs, has done for this iOS audio and visual vulnerability. So this goes exactly into the defensive playbook, right? So if an offense knows that your device is vulnerable with these 8 CVEs that our guys performed research on, that plays exactly into what you were talking about. How these CVEs actually, created vulnerable iOS devices. So what was all this about?
Yeah, so basically, this was done by Adam Donfield, one of our researchers who's outstanding. And you can see that there are multiple vulnerabilities. I think, one of the keys in this entire thing is it's iOS. One of the things that a lot of our customers are very conscious of is the fact that iOS is a real computing platform. Apple has done an excellent job on the malicious app side of things, but when it comes to the D and the N, the platforms are equally susceptible. So in this particular case, you can see these multiple CVEs, and they actually break into a couple different categories, that we won't get into all the bits and bytes of right now. We certainly can. You can read the blog. Adam did a great job writing the blog. But they go into two different groups, both of which, including the video audio component, enabled an elevation of privileges. So it was a hole that somebody could actually burrow into, and all the technical details are on our blog that you can dive into. There was two different ways, two different parts of that system that would enable somebody to have a complete compromise on the device. So it's pretty interesting, and the primary reason that we put it in here was because it's very indicative of of a typical way of approaching it. So one was this AVE video encoder, and that's about 7 of these different CVEs at the top. And then the one down there, 6979, was an IO surface. But both of them allowed applications to gain kernel privileges, which then would lead to a complete compromise.
Yeah, that's scary stuff. And, people on the street just are unaware of this, and you really can't find it unless you have something, looking for it.
Exactly.
All right. So the famous coffee shop example. So you did talk a little bit about the network attacks and how they work. And most people are familiar, but give us a quick review at, how a Wi-Fi attack happens. And then on the next slide, we'll show the data that we have on Wi-Fi attacks that we actually detected.
Yeah, that's perfect. And then a little teaser. When we get to the very end of the presentation today, we're going to talk about a couple real-world examples, one of which is going to come directly back to this in a James Bond-esque fashion. So I think that'll be kind of fun. But as Scott was saying, basically there's multiple different freely available tools and techniques to be able to intercept the traffic that somebody has. And initially, what usually occurs, as I mentioned earlier, is surveillance. I'm actually going to sit here, I'm going to survey, and I'm going to see, are you working for XYZ Corp? You know, what platform are you on? So I can figure out what exploit I'm going to use to be able to do that. But a key component of it is I control your network. And since I control your network, I can decide where you're going to go as well. And that actually is, as I mentioned, us being enterprise focused, you know, primary thing we wanted to do is make sure we could do all of our detection on device without having to go to the cloud. Part of it is because if somebody controls our network, they're not going to allow me to go to the cloud. So that's the way this whole thing works. Starts off with surveillance. I then control the traffic. I can then, based on my surveillance, deliver an exploit, and I have compromised your device.
Perfect. Yeah, that's scary stuff. All right. So on the Wi-Fi attacks, so I mean this data was taken from September 30, and what we did is this is all of the threats for a 3-month period, so July, August, September of this year. At the bottom, you'll see a rogue access point, and I believe you talked about this earlier, JT, on how people were picking up rogue access points. So our customers were actually, they found a surveillance device, right? You talked about targeted attacks. So if I am looking for you and I am targeting you and I'm looking for your device and information from you in order to steal credentials or compromise your device to surveil you, a rogue access point could be, an effective method. And our customers are actually picking these up. And then MIDM attacks. So of all devices, 9% of the devices actually detected a MIDM attack. And so, if you're in a meeting with 10 people, one of those persons has actually detected a Wi-Fi attack. The locations and everything like that we record are private to our customers. We don't actually see this data, but our customers can actually pick up where these occur. And so they can make intelligent decisions on guiding their users to maybe stay away, or looking at the different places that these are happening and guiding users, or maybe even, JT, they could create compliance policies to avoid those networks altogether, right?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely the case. That's completely correct. I think and you might be getting into this, Scott. I think of the 9% on the MIDM attacks is really interesting, and I think what's really interesting is the change, right? Just like we mentioned, the change at the beginning of the number of people that knew that they had a breach, and the drop in the folks that didn't know as more and more instrumentation was put on devices. Can you talk about the change in the MIDM number a little bit?
Yeah, so we've done this report a couple of times for 2017, and so the MIDM attacks have actually increased quarter over quarter. So just last quarter, in the second quarter, which is in the summer months, it was not even 5% of devices that picked up a MIDM attack. And so now it's almost twice as many number of devices out of that time period, quarter over quarter, that is increased. So, I mean, that could be several factors. One, we obviously have more devices, but from a percentage standpoint, you would think it'd be the same, but it's actually increased. And I think, I think cyber criminals are becoming, they're becoming smarter of what we're using, and they're targeting this. I don't know why it's increased, but it has, and it's a factor of 2. So that's quite a significant increase just over a 6-month period.
Exactly. I think that's really important.
All right. So now we're going to talk about one of the more popular Wi-Fi attacks that people were asking us about. When KRACK came out some months ago, we had calls to the office, and customers were just making sure that they could answer questions inside their companies. Talk to us a little bit about the key reinstallation attack, KRACK.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's a great name. It's a great acronym, and it sounds scary. I mean, basically, what this is this was, as you can see from the slide here, if an attacker was within physical range of the Wi-Fi network, they could basically jack with the keys. And so the encryption part, they could kind of reinsert their own keys and therefore be able to compromise and see the traffic that somebody was having. And as it says on here, this was a big news in the third quarter because it affected every single Wi-Fi device that was out there that was based on the WPA2 protocol, which is almost all of them. So it was basically on the router side as well as obviously being able to compromise the devices. So I know that all the major router companies have now pushed their patches out, and that's we keep hammering on the make sure you update your systems. Well, that's all parts of the system because I mentioned earlier that persistence is consistent in security on mobile just like it has been every place else. I sometimes joke that just like Elle Woods in Legally Blonde, where she said the rules of hair care are simple and finite, the rules of security are simple and finite. And two primary rules. Rule one is I need to maintain persistence once I've compromised the device, and rule number two is land and expand, right? So they're always looking for the weakest link, and then they're going to expand into their network and do stuff. So in this particular case, the primary weakness was actually in the routers themselves. So I definitely strongly encourage everybody to have updated their routers. Now, from our side, we have the little comment down at the bottom, because again, we're doing the zero-day DNA detection on the device. As we mentioned, if you want to maintain persistence, you're going to try and compromise the device. So while this attack, when it comes across, we have certain techniques that would detect portions of it in terms of ability to read the traffic and some things along those lines. Then there's also the second part is which the goal is still to compromise the device. And once those attempts occur, we would be able to flag it, stop it right then and there.
Yeah, I think that's an important part because people do ask, do you detect this type of attack? But, essentially what you talked about with gaining persistence, the indicators of compromise are all the same, no matter if you come in through KRACK or some other type of method. Looking for that persistency is really what you need to look for. And that's the lowest common denominator, right? That's the lowest number of variables, whereas the entry vectors are in the millions, right? With all the apps and networks that we use.
Exactly.
And then I actually can't believe that you referenced Legally Blonde. We may need to change.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So malicious apps. People talk to us about apps all the time. They want to know which app is good, which app is bad. Talk to us a little bit about apps before we show the audience, the type of mobile malware and malicious apps that we've actually detected over the last quarter.
Yeah, this is actually the part of the world that most of the people are kind of used to traditionally from traditional endpoints. Is okay, I've got a malicious app that's going to come on and it's going to start trying to do something like in this case, permissions abuse and things on those lines. What's been interesting for us is, as we're going to talk about in the next few slides, the majority of the malicious apps we've seen so far are really consumer focused, and they're really focused on things like click fraud and the like. So we've just detected a couple, and again some great blog posts by the Z-Labs research guys where we've notified Google about malicious apps that have been discovered. We notified Facebook about a click fraud against them. But any of these things that are able to actually get on devices can also actually get leveraged into being weaponized into something else. Like I said, as a general rule, we don't expect a malicious app to be the way that somebody would deliver a targeted exploit, but that doesn't mean it can't deliver, something that can still be very much of a problem. And this is just a typical thread that we've got here of a particular malicious app that did a permissions abuse. From that, was able to deliver the exploit because again, they want to compromise the device, and then that's when the data got leaked, et cetera.
Yeah, and I think we're going to talk about how to actually find these apps and how difficult this actually is. So this is a chart where we have theoretically claimed how difficult it would be to find a malicious app inside of a population over 3 million different apps, in the app stores. You can't really do this manually, right? Because there's not enough research time, and that is, by people and by hours, right? Because there's only 24 hours in a day. What is this chart telling us about manually analyzing apps and looking for good ones and bad ones?
Yeah, every once in a while, many years ago, I was working with the good folks at eBay, and somebody threw out an acronym one time, and I was like, jot the acronym down. It's like, I got to find out what that acronym means. And that acronym it's a BFO, which is a blinding flash of the obvious. That's what this is, right? This is a BFO. What it basically is saying is the analysis was, we said, okay, there was about 3 million apps, and this happened to be in the Google Play Store at the time. And there's about 3 million apps. We actually spent some time talking about, we've got some of the best mobile malware researchers on the planet, and we basically estimated how many of those guys exist. And how many of them can how long would it take for them to assess any given app? And when you do that, you get that yellow line. That's the ability to analyze. So actually the labels are backwards here. The ability to analyze is the bottom one. That's how many we can actually do. Whereas the top bar, with the growth, starting with that 3 million, but with the growth of, I think it's about 6,000 apps per day going into there, that gap is what needs to be investigated. And one of the main things that we were looking at is, if you looked at traditionally, as the mobile malware world is starting to catch up, even if you look at the blogs kind of across the board, it'll be, there's 2 million, when they announce a new piece of malware, there's 2 million downloads, there's 5 million downloads, 14 million downloads. Well, if there's that many downloads, then clearly machine learning based detection of those threats wasn't quite in prime time yet. For us, we actually have been training what we call Z9, our engine is called Z9. We've been training our machine learning based engine against mobile malware for the better part of 2 years now. And we are now putting it actually on endpoints. We announced it a couple months ago. And that is literally putting machine learning based detection for mobile malware on Android devices to start off with. And part of the value proposition was, you can't do it manually. And it appears that the vast majority in the industry is manual today, which is why you're getting this huge gap.
Yeah, the gap always exists, and I think there was news yesterday on a new one that has surfaced. But in malicious apps are what our data says that it is the least popular attack method. Obviously, the iOS apps are fewer than the Android apps and malware that we see there. Why does everybody focus on the apps, JT? Is it because that's visible on their device and it feels more tangible? Because we definitely get a lot of questions here, but our data says, 4.5% of devices had Android malware, but yet, 9% were attacked over the Wi-Fi. So, you're twice as likely to be attacked over a network than via an app. And you did talk about targeted, right? So a targeted attack is not going to just, throw up an app in the Play Store and hope that someone gets, and downloads that and successfully signs up. I mean, that's kind of a difficult task. So why do you think the malicious apps questions are so prevalent?
I think this is my own personal opinion. So, the opinions represent JT Keating, not necessarily Zimperium Corporation. My personal opinion is that it's a combination of things. One is we've been trained that way with antivirus, right? In traditional endpoints, everybody has always talked about, you got a piece of malware on there. Well, malware, it's got the where part in there. It's software, right? And so we've been trained that way from the very beginning. And the security community and technology and conversation has always been based around that. I think that's point one. I think point two is apps are something you can see. To your point, they're very visible, right? They're right in front of me, especially on this personal device. Even if it is a corporate-owned device, users feel like it's personal. And then I think the third part is related to that top line up there. I think, Apple has, like I said, they've done a very good job. For those folks that aren't fully versed in this, Apple has a very strong vetting process for the apps that get into the App Store. Things do get by. In fact, I'm going to be blogging about one this week, but it's relatively rare. On the Google side, with Android, Google's doing a much better job of tightening up the Google Play Store, but as a part of their whole value and ecosystem, they allow third-party app stores as well. So a lot of Apple's conversation has been focused on the apps, as Apple is the safe platform because we vet all of our apps. And the data shows that is in fact the case. But as we talked about, back to your point, I think we also have to recognize that our sample base is going to be skewed towards enterprise customers. Now, people are people, but the predominant use cases have been for corporate-owned devices, BYOD devices and the like, which is going to lean more towards looking for things where people are actually trying to target a particular company.
Yeah, I think you do bring up an important point about our data set and how, it may be skewed because our customers are on the cutting edge of security tools, obviously because they have a mobile threat detection on all of their either corporate owned or BYO devices. So even the most secure customers are finding these. And so it is important to note that, I believe, because when I go to the neighborhood and I talk about mobile security, no one has any idea how their devices work. They have no idea actually, where their data goes in the cloud if they're using a free app. They really just don't put it together, and how that data can be used against them. Or, you talked about earlier some of the, the clickbot fraud and things like that. So that is interesting. But a really interesting recent example, and I think this even appeared a couple of days ago in Poland. Now, JT is a Bankbot version, so a new version of Bankbot popped up, and I think we're putting together a blog on that. Talk to us about how Bankbot works. So this is a really interesting, malicious app type of example.
Yes, yeah, and this is interesting and is very reminiscent of when phishing attacks first started with fish sites against, eBay and all the banks back in the early days of the internet, right? What this basically does is Android-focused malware, and one of the differences between iOS and Android is on Android, an app can kind of check out other apps. It's not really supposed to interact with them, but it can do a survey, it can do an inventory of what's on there. In this particular case, what it does is it will get on there usually as a part of a utility like a flashlight or a level or something like that. When it does, the first thing it does is it will scan the apps that are on that device. If it finds one of its targeted banks, and to Scott's point, we have a blog that will be going up today about this. In April of last year, there were roughly 20 targeted entertainment companies and banks that were listed when they kind of did a test of this whole thing. It reemerged again in October. There was 150 banks, mostly in the Middle East, but 27 different countries. Yesterday, there was a variant that sounds identical to Bankbot and is being analyzed by all of our teams that has the exact same use profile that is now targeting banks in Poland. So it's an expansion, but basically what it does, it scans and looks for these. It says, okay, look, I'm looking for Bank XYZ. If Bank XYZ's app is on that phone, it will watch. And the minute the user clicks on Bank XYZ's app, it slides a template that it has already downloaded from its command and control center on top of it. That is just literally a simple template. The user puts in user ID and password. It says, can you try that again? You got it wrong. It's gone. User now logs into the legitimate one and doesn't even know that they've already given up their credentials. So at its core, it's a simple phishing attack. But we're seeing it start to spread rapidly. And I personally believe, unfortunately, when this stuff happens, last April was a test. Okay, it worked. Let's make some tweaks here and there. What didn't go right? Okay, and then we get a little bit more, I'll get a little bit more, and we continue to expand.
Yeah, that's pretty scary, because if we, assume that in April it was just a test, and now these guys have really, honed this attack and they're rolling it out to different countries. I can only imagine it just kind of sweeps through, the globe, starting at some point, and we still see the famous, I'm a prince from whatever country phishing attacks, in via email. So something like this is very sophisticated. An average user won't be able to detect that this is actually happening to them until their bank account is cleaned out.
Absolutely. I was on a panel with some folks at the BlackBerry Security Summit just a little while ago, and it was a great panel because the audience was fully engaged, and they were talking about and they were talking about phishing, and they were saying, we really have to train our people, and which is absolutely the case, you do. But in this case, you wouldn't know. I mean, it looks just like I mean, it's just they have a template that goes and pulls it in, and you give up your user ID and credential, and it's gone. You don't even know. There is no looking for typos or anything. It's you just throw it in. So, and the thing that concerns me about it is that, yeah, it's in banks right now, but that's no different. Just like a lot of phishing sites started with eBay and started with Amazon, but then before long it was every bank and every, so we have to find ways of preventing this, and obviously, this is something that we do.
Great. Thanks, JT. And then, so that concludes our webinar today. We've got time for questions if you want to hang on. If you do not want to ask a question, while we're on the webinar, you can send me an email and I'll track it down and just email you back. So my email address is there provided, scott@zimperium.com. If you want to go ahead and grab the threat report, it's now live on the Zimperium blog, and we'll send that to you in an automated fashion once you actually close your GoToWebinar window. It gets sent an hour later. So if you can hang on, we'll go ahead and send that to you, or you can grab it now at the blog. But JT, we've got some questions that have come in. I've got some canned questions, and then questions from users on whether or not they can use this recording. Yes, it's recording, and you can have the slides. But somebody asked about threat actors, or they say what should companies be most worried about, and why?
That's a great question. For me, there's the simple answer, and then there's a little bit more elaborate. But the simple answer is, you have to, if you have corporate assets, or cardholder data, patient data, I mean, all these things, if you're protecting critical infrastructure and you've got mobile anywhere in and around there, then obviously you have to worry about, the classic kind of threat actors. Now there's one that we're kind of keeping our eye on, and we're kind of saying, okay, this could be bad. And that is a group called the Lazarus Group. People are probably pretty familiar with them. They're a North Korean-backed organization. They're the ones that did the Sony breach quite some time ago, after the interview came out. They are believed to have been behind WannaCry. And now there's evidence, and our research team has seen things that are linked back to them that are Android-based. So we're starting to see some of that occurring.
Yeah, that is scary. WannaCry definitely got a lot of play, and if those guys are responsible for that, we need to keep an eye on them, because attacks are just becoming more sophisticated. So, I mean, do you think that we're going to have more targeted accounts, attacks, and more targeted attacks like this, or is it going to be malware related? So I'm talking 2018-ish.
Yeah, my answer on that is, I think that the data is going to be a little bit fuzzy, and I'll tell you why. I believe that targeted attacks are only going to continue to increase on mobile. We've already seen it. We've already seen it in our data as we're talking about. So that is going to continue. The thing that I think is going to make it a little bit fuzzy is, with actual true machine learning based detection of mobile malware out in the market for the first time really ever with our solution, and then as other people, potentially catch up on that whole thing. I think that there's a lot more out there that we haven't detected yet. So that gap on that chart that you showed. So I think it's going to all of a sudden look like this huge epidemic of mobile malware, but I think the huge epidemic of mobile malware is already out there. We just haven't had the ability to truly machine learning detect it because everybody's been approaching it the way that we've had to, which has been kind of traditional approaches. So I think it's going to go up in both. And yes, I work for Zimperium, so you kind of expect me to say that, but I'm also just telling you my actual opinion. But like I said, I do think that the mobile malware is going to seem like it's just skyrocketing when in fact I think it's already there. We just haven't been able to detect it. We haven't been able to turn the lights on, just like we talked about in that first slide.
Yeah, scary stuff. And and I agree. Most of the, if you look on the flip side and just how people sell us products with personalization and with machine learning, I think they're going to attack us in the same way. I think it's going to be like an AI versus AI battle. And, fortunately, we're ahead of the game because we're looking at it the way, we are looking at it. So I think
Yeah,
I think you're right.
I agree. That's a great point.
Yeah, the personalization is going to hit us from both sides. So that concludes our webinars. We don't have any more questions, JT. So appreciate you joining me with our data here this morning. So appreciate it, and I will talk to you this afternoon on the next run of this webinar.